So we were learning chapters 23 into chapter 24 of Shmuel Aleph, 1 Samuel, Paragraph Gimel Chaf Daled. And to refresh your memory where we left off so we can appreciate the Midrashic and Talmudic sections I'm going to bring in. And therefore, I might read a little less in Hebrew and exclusively in English. Even when I read in Hebrew, as you know, I translate. But in order to maximize the substance of what I get in today, I like to read in Hebrew because it adds an aspect of authenticity to the study of the Bible, of Tanakh. But again, for time, let's do this. David was told, the Philistines are raiding Keilah. It's a city, and plundering the threshing floors. That is to say, the Philistines were our ongoing enemy during this period. And let's take a look at that map again. So here's the land of Israel before it does show you where the civil war took place, that it ultimately divides into the northern kingdom, also known as the kingdom of Israel, with the capital of Samaria, Shomron, and the southern kingdom, otherwise known as the kingdom of Judah or Yehuda or Judea, with its capital in Jerusalem. Before the civil war, and that takes place after the death of David and of his son Solomon, Shlomo, during the next one, King Rehavam, that's when the civil war takes place that splits it up. So you've got one big country, and King Saul is the king at this moment, and there are the Philistines, which today is the Gaza Strip where Hamas is. And so always good to have that picture. There's Jerusalem, there's northern Philistines, and it extends all the way down into the Sinai desert area. Okay, so the Philistines constantly were raiding. Nowadays, it's on the other side. Nowadays, it's Judea, Samaria, what the Arabs call the West Bank, and it's the so-called Palestinians who raid from this side. But then it was from this side. Okay, so we go back to the text. So they're attacking Keilah, and they're destroying the threshing floors. That is, they feel they're not strong enough at this moment to confront the Hebrews, the Jews at war. So they're trying to create financial destruction and attack them that way. David consulted the Lord. Shall I go and attack those Philistines? And we learned this last week. I need to do this, a little bit of this repetition from last week, because that's where our discussion of Talmud and Midrash is going to get into. He asks of God, should I attack the Philistines? And I taught you last week this terribly important practice that was expected, that you would consult with God before going to war. You would go to the high Kohen, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and would ask him to read from the Urim and Tumim, which was a parchment inserted into the breastplate that had the 12 precious stones, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And you would ask a single question at a time, and not like a lot of questions at once. And they were supposed to be kind of like yes, no questions. And I even taught you last week, by contrast, there was King Asa of Judah, Yehuda, Judea, many generations later, who had erred, according to the Bible, that when he became ill, he put his faith in his doctors and did not pray to God for healing, did not turn or rely on God. He relied on his doctors. And what we're supposed to do is rely on God to lead us to the right doctors and to bless the doctor's efforts and the medicine's efforts to heal us. But we're not supposed to put our faith in the doctors. So we did that last week, how David asked of God, shall I go and attack the Philistines? And the Lord said, go, attack the Philistines and you will save Keilah. Again, he asked, simple question, ha'elech v'hiketi ba'plishtim ha'elech, 4 words. And God said, lech v'hikita ba'plishtim, 3-word answer. And he added, v'hoshata et Keilah you will save the city. Okay. And then David's men said, we're scared. We're scared. Frankly, there's 400 or 600 of us. We're concerned about the Philistines in general. And now you want to go on the offensive and look for a fight that we don't have to have, maybe? So they're burning some grain. Do we really want to confront them head on? Maybe we're lucky that's all they're doing. So David consulted the Lord again. And again, that's through the Urim and Tumim. And God answered, march down at once to Keilah. Kum raid Keilah. So he didn't really say it once. He didn't say it once. That's a bad translation. That's why I keep going back to the Hebrew. He said, Kum raid Keilah, which exactly before God had said, Lech v'hikita ba'plishtim. All right, go down to Keilah. Ki ani noten et plishtim bi'adecha. I'm going to hand the Philistines into your hands. Okay. So David and his men went to Keilah and fought against the Philistines. He drove off their cattle and inflicted a severe defeat on them. Thus David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. I want to go for a moment now and take a look, and then we'll come back to the story. First, let's take a quick look at the map. Do that first. Oh, the other map. And here's a map of this period. And there's Gaza, where the Philistines are, Philistia, whatever. And we've already encountered cities like Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, Gat, Goliath with some Gat. And these were the cities, for example, when they took the Ark of the Covenant many, many months ago in our study, and the thing with the 5 golden mice and the hemorrhoids and everything. Okay. Here is Keilah. So the Philistia is kind of a beige yellow, and the Jewish territory is purple. So you see that Keilah is kind of on the border. Now, again, to get your bearings, there's the Dead Sea, and there's going to be the Jordan River, the so-called West Bank of today. That's Judea, and Samaria is up north beyond this map. And there's Hebron, and Jerusalem is over here. And so you go west and south a little bit. So Keilah is a little bit west of Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, a little bit to the west. Okay. So he's in Keilah, and the Philistines raid. This is going on kind of like right now up north in Israel, where Hezbollah is coming in from the terrorists of southern Lebanon, have just the last month or so tiptoed across the Israeli northern border and are doing a little bit of trouble, making a little bit of trouble up north. And there's a national debate going on. You hear the things that the New York Times and Washington Post find interesting, namely Israel's tumult over proposed judicial reform, which is a political enough story that I will not take time out in our Torah classes on it. But what you don't hear about is that there's a serious other debate going on about what to do about Hezbollah continuing to cross the border. They've been setting up little tents on Israeli land, and it's like they're daring Israel to throw them out. And Israel, normally you throw people out when they're from another country settling on your land. But there's a question, will it start a war? Do they want a war now? All of that. Okay, so that's how things go in life. What's going on is guerrilla attacks, not terrorism here, but guerrilla attacks into the land of Israel, setting fire to grain. And that's an important thing. And it's even more important in those days, because nowadays, I mean, my goodness, we take for granted. What we take for granted today, it's unbelievable. We take for granted that you want peaches? Well, what do you want? You want white peaches or you want yellow peaches? You want the large ones or the regular size? Or maybe you want the organic. Well, how much are they selling at Ralph's? What are they selling for at Albertsons? How about Smart and Final? Do you want to get it? Or would you like Instacart to deliver it to your home? or maybe just have Amazon deliver it with Whole Foods. I mean, that's the world we live in. In that world, it wasn't like that. If people burned your grain, you had no grain. You didn't go to Ralph's and say, well, I'll just get some Quaker oatmeal. And my debate's going to be, do I want to get fresh oatmeal and cook it and put it in the microwave? Or do I want to go and buy instant? Do I want to get instant, but it'll leave a little mess? Or do I want to make the packets? Do I want it with sugar, without sugar, with raisins, with cream? Do we want it low sugar, regular sugar? Maybe I don't even want to get Quaker. Maybe I want to get the store brand and save 8 cents. That's what it's like today. When people complain about life today, people don't know how good, even the poorest Americans have air conditioning. King David didn't have air conditioning. Who had air conditioning? That's why many of the most wealthy people in the old days would have a second home, like kings. Herod had a second palace up at Masada and in that area, but before the Romans were a problem there, because you had a summer home. It was cooler up in the mountains. It was cooler. So when they were burning the grain, they knew that what they were doing. They weren't just being nudniks. They were creating a significant financial, economic threat to the region by burning their granaries. This is why that's so important. The Gemara is going to talk about it. Talmud. There we go. The Talmud in Eruvin, first of all. Let's see if I've got it in the right order. I hope I do. Okay. This is Masechet Eruvin, Tractate Eruvin, Daf Mem Hey Amud Aleph, folio 45a. And again, because I have a lot of material, I won't cover it all because I just won't have the time. We'll do the best we can. We'll continue next time. I'll do it mostly in English. But you saw I tried to go strictly in English, and the wrong translation caught us at the jump back anyway. This is a discussion actually about Shabbat laws. And as I've told you many, many, many times over the years, it's the flavor and the nature of the Talmud that while they're discussing one thing, they get onto segues. Because the Talmud is kind of a running transcript of the rabbis at their daily yeshiva studies. So what you're getting is the way people study. It's like, here, I'm studying the book of Samuel with you, Shmuel Aleph, and I got into a little segue about Hezbollah in northern Israel, and I even made a reference to judicial reform and the Washington Post, New York Times. It's natural. You segue a little bit. So when you get a lot of rabbis with a lot of knowledge sitting in a yeshiva, in an academy, talking about something, there are going to be segues. And the way the Talmud works is they just go with the flow. They go with the segues. And that's why Rambam later created the Mishnah Torah for the purpose of, okay, the segues are fascinating, and we all want to learn it. That's the main thing to learn. But for those that just want to get the bottom line, what's the law, and skip the interesting conversation, that's why he created Mishnah Torah, so that you could look that up. But we want to follow the stream of thought. So we're getting in, the name of the tractate is Eruvin. So if you've ever heard of an Eruv, right? Eruvin is plural. It's just the laws of Eruvs. And as you know, Eruvs are about, Eruvin are about carrying on Shabbat. So you could see they're discussing Shabbat, carrying an Eruvin, and it takes them a little bit afield. And the discussion starts getting into, are you allowed to make war on Shabbat? Well, we're talking about the laws of Shabbat. I mean, you're not allowed to turn on lights on Shabbat, right? You're not supposed to get in a car and drive on Shabbat. Are you allowed to make war on Shabbat? So you'll say, well, on one hand, no. Wait till Sunday to start the war. If you have a strategy, let's say they decide they want to go to war with Hezbollah because of what I talked about, and they've already decided, let's just say, I don't believe they have, but let's just say they've decided this is going to stop, and if we do anything, Hezbollah is going to start shooting 6,000 rockets a day, so we have to have a preemptive attack. So there's a good argument to say, halachically, if that's the plan, do it on Sunday. Don't do it on Shabbos. But if, let's say, they would have strategic meeting and they would say, you know what? They'll never expect that a Jewish state would attack them on Shabbat. And it will save our strategic experts have done a study and have determined we could save 3,000 lives or 3 lives if we hit them by surprise on Shabbat. Then it would be allowed to attack on Shabbat. But where does this all come from? Now, what if they attack you? Nowadays, it's a given. If they attack, you fight back. There's no question. Originally, in the time of Joshua, they didn't know what to do. In the time of, and we learned this, I don't know, a year or two ago when we studied the book of Joshua, that he had to go to war, and it was Friday. If you remember, it was Friday afternoon, and it's going to be Shabbos soon. So in our home, when it's going to be Shabbos soon, it means Denise has to get ready to light the candles, and I have to start doing my things for Shabbat, turning on certain lights and whatnot. Got to get ready for Shabbat. What happens when it's an hour to Shabbat and you're in the middle of a war? What do you do now? Do you remember what happened in the book of Joshua? They had never confronted the question. They had never asked God the question, are we allowed to fight on Shabbat? So in order to delay the possibility of sinning on fighting on Shabbat, but you had to fight because they're attacking. You remember what happened? God made the sun stand still. It's the only time in history. Friday afternoon, the sun did not set. The sun did not set till the war was over. Pretty good. War was over. Like in the TV, like in the movies when they want to show that 2 or 3 days have passed. So it goes dark, light, dark, light, dark, light. So here the Gemara is talking about it. That's the context. Since the Gemara discussed war on Shabbat, the Gemara cites Rav Yehuda, who said that he learned from Rav. I remind you, it's a halachic imperative when you quote someone else, you're not supposed to make it seem like it's your knowledge by itself. You're supposed to quote your source. With regard to Gentiles, non-Jews, who besiege Jewish towns, they may not go out to fight against them with their weapons. That was the initial understanding. Nor may they desecrate Shabbat in any other way due to them, but rather they must wait until after Shabbat. That was the original understanding. First of all, who's going to attack Israel in those days, or even now, besides Gentiles? They're just saying Gentiles. The understanding is there was not 2 Jewish countries. Jews are not going to attack Israel. So just a matter of an expression there. So with regard to non-Jews who are attacking Israel, Jewish towns, you're not allowed to fight back on Shabbat. That was the original rule. That was also taught in the Baraita, with a caveat. A Baraita, I once taught you, is when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was gathering together all the Torah teachings and all the academies and putting together the Mishnah. I had a whole long introduction and backgrounder on that last Thursday. He had to leave some material out. He just couldn't put it all in. It would have been like a 75 volume or 700 volume Mishnah. So text that was valuable, but that he couldn't include, he had to edit out, is known as a Baraita. So but it carries the same weight. So it was taught in the Baraita with regard to Gentiles, if you beseech, etc. In what case is this said that you're not allowed to fight him back on Shabbat, and you have to just back off till after Shabbat? It's said in the case where the Gentiles came and besieged the town with regard to money matters, like banditry. However, if they came with regard to lives, like Hezbollah, so let's say Hezbollah are setting up tents, T-E-N-T, in the north, that would be more monetary, let's say. You don't fight them on Shabbat over there if you allowed it to go on this long. But if they're coming after people's lives, they're making war. If there's concern the Gentiles will attack, not only that they are attacking, but that they're planning to attack, so you need to go preemptive. They may go out against them with their weapons and may desecrate Shabbat due to them. So you may do that on Shabbat. By the way, actually, although the expression is machal alena Shabbat, the expression is that you may desecrate Shabbat in such a case. Actually, it's not desecration. It's a commandment of Shabbat. It's like, figuratively speaking, you're desecrating Shabbat, but you're paradoxically honoring Shabbat by going to war to save lives, if that's what's necessary. And with regard to a town that is located near the border, so where was Keilah? Here's Keilah, and here's the orange or brown or beige. Why couldn't they just make it a color that I could describe easily, like red and blue? So since Keilah is so close to the border with the Philistines, okay, in a case where you're that close to the border, even if the Gentiles did not come with regard to lives, but rather only with regard to matters of hay and straw. Exactly what we just learned here in chapter 23. To raid and spoil the town, you may go out against them with your weapons and may desecrate the Shabbat, because the border must be carefully guarded in order to prevent enemies from gaining a foothold there. Interesting. And so they then get into a discussion about Babylonia. It's interesting, but I won't get into it right now. Rabbi Dostai of the town of Beeri expounded, well, what is the meaning of that which is written? And they told David, saying, behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah. That's our chapter now. And they robbed the threshing floors, after which David asked God how he should respond. It was taught in the Baraita. I just explained to you, Baraita. Keilah was a town located near the border. And the Philistines came only with regard to matters of hay and straw, as it is written, and they robbed the threshing floors. That's what it said, chapter 23. It said, David was told the Philistines are raiding Keilah and plundering the threshing floors. So they're quoting, do you know the kind of knowledge these rabbis had to have of the entire Bible, inside out, to just be sitting there talking about the laws of Shabbat? And suddenly they segue into whether you can go to war on Shabbat. And there's a rabbi saying, well, now that you mention it, you know, in chapter 23 of the book of 1 Samuel, it talks about the battle of Keilah. Hey, come on. Who knows about this? Everybody knows about David and Goliath. A lot of people that don't happen to have biblical knowledge could off the spur of the moment say, a biblical King David and Goliath. He had a thing with the slingshot. Who comes up with Keilah, with the battle of Keilah, that they burned threshing floors? Who thinks of that? You know the knowledge level they have to just pull that out of, I pulled it out of the hat because we're learning it right now. But imagine you're not learning it. Let's say it was any day but today. Let's say it's the last 5 years of our classes. Who thinks of this? That's why one needs to have a tremendous amount of respect for the rabbis of the Talmud, because all too often we just hear them quoted. We hear them quoted. The rabbi gets up in shul, says a nice sermon, a good sermon, and says, you know, it says in the Talmud this, it says in the Talmud that. And then among people that don't go to an Orthodox shul, they say, well, I heard that the rabbis of the Talmud say that, but my personal opinion is that, and it's like, that's your personal opinion? I mean, it's Albert Einstein said, you know, E equals MC squared. But my personal opinion is G equals RB R2D2. I mean, who are you? Who are you? I mean, you go to even like you go to a barber. Einstein doesn't go to a barber, you know. So the thing is that we need to have enormous respect for these rabbis, that they can even get into a discussion like that. And they're citing this story that David asked God Almighty, should I go into the battle? Even though, which indicates the war may be waged in a border town on Shabbat. And that's how we learn the law, that it is permitted to go to war against enemies of Israel, even on Shabbat, even if they're only attacking us monetarily and not attacking, risking lives. And so they continue to Talmud discusses. Gemara refutes this proof in saying, what is David's dilemma? If you say he had a halachic question and was in doubt whether it's permitted or prohibited to fight the Philistines in Shabbat, well, it's possible to respond, but the court of Samuel was then an example. Why didn't he go and inquire by way of Urim and Tumim of Samuel? And so the Gemara is saying maybe he was only asking, will he succeed or will he not succeed? That is, I'm allowed to go to war on Shabbat, but if I'm going to fail, God, should I go? Should I not go? And so the other rabbis are saying, do you remember how God answered him? Go and smite the Philistines and save Keilah. Learn from this, from the assurance that God gave David of his victory, that was the subject of his inquiry. The takeaway is an insight into David's question and answer of God, but also an insight that Jews may go to war on Shabbat. And of course, tragically, the famous example in our own lifetimes for many of us not all of us, but most of us, is that Israel was attacked on Yom Kippur in 1973. And there was no question. Nobody was sitting and saying, we just have 14 more hours to go, and then we're going to start fighting back. They called the reserves right away. They called everybody right away. Everybody went back to war. But the fact that they knew that's what they're going to do is because it already was established in Jewish, and there were plenty of other battles that went on Shabbat as well. The Irgun and the Lehi, we studied them on Sundays a few weeks ago. They took advantage early on of the British not expecting that the Jewish underground would attack them on Shabbat. And then the British got used to it. Now, this whole question, I'm going to go to another Talmudic tractate, Tractate Yoma. And Masechet Yoma, which mostly focuses on Yom Kippur, but guess what? They get into segues, has an interesting conversation about how exactly, what does this mean when people like King David and others, or not yet king, and other people would ask of God, Urim and Tumim? What's that all about? Now, I've explained it to you. Without saying spoiler alert, I've already explained it, but here's the Talmud talking about it. The sages taught, and again, I normally like to do it in Hebrew as well, but I want to cover as much as I can in our time because it's so much. It's really interesting to me. The sages taught, how does one consult the Urim and Tumim? The one asking stands with his face toward the one who is asked, namely the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, or the Meshuach Milchama, or we learned on, was it Sunday, that we learned about the idea of a Meshuach Milchama, the idea that there was a king who was uniquely anointed, a priest, a Kohen, uniquely anointed to go with the people in battle. There were like two high priests, so to speak. We learned it Sunday when we were talking about how the women would exchange white dresses with each other on Tu B'Av, and that the daughter of the Kohen Gadol would exchange dresses with the daughter of the Meshuach Milchama, the anointed for battle. So there was the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, and there was also separately the lead Kohen who would lead the people in battle with the Ark of the Covenant when they went to war. And so he could also be consulted. So when you wanted to ask a question of God, you went face to face with that Kohen, and not any Kohen, specifically the Kohen Gadol or the Meshuach Milchama, and the one who was asked, namely the Kohen, turns his face towards the divine presence, namely that parchment, the Urim Tumim, in which the explicit name of God is found. How do you face the Urim and Tumim? In other words, the questioner is face to face facing the Kohen, but the Kohen, upon being asked the question, does not face back at the questioner, rather looks down to the parchment. The one who asks says his question, for example, shall I pursue after this troop? And the one who is asked, the Kohen, answers him according to the response he receives and says, for example, thus says God, Ko Amar Hashem, go up and succeed. So it's very short, terse questions, very short, terse answers. Shall I pursue after the troop? Go up and succeed. Rabbi Yehuda says he need not say the words, thus says God. In other words, for Rabbi Yehuda, it is inferred that if he's looking at the Urim and Tumim and then responding, it must be God. It's sufficient, so he doesn't literally have to use that terminology, sufficient to relay the content of the response and say, go up and succeed, which is actually 2 words. That's how terse it is. In English, it's 4 words. It is a correct translation there, but in Hebrew, it's aleh b'hatzlach. So, erdof acharei hagadud hazeh, shall I pursue this legion? Aleh b'hatzlach, go, succeed. All right. One does not ask in a loud voice, as it is stated, and he shall stand before Elazar the Kohen, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim. I'm sorry that these curses jumping around a little today. It's in a mood. And the text in Numbers, Sefer Bamidbar, 4th book of the Torah, chapter 27, it says, he shall present himself to Eleazar the priest, who shall on his behalf seek the decision of the Urim before Hashem, to sha'alo b'mishpat ha'urim l'fnei Hashem. And based on what he's told, is the answer. So you'll stand before him and seek the decision of the Urim. By such instruction shall they go out, and by such instruction shall they come in, he and all the militia. Okay. So how shall he inquire? Is there a further process? So we've just been taught he should go face the Kohen, speak in a soft voice, ask his question. And we're told he should ask akin to the way that Hannah spoke in her prayer. That's referring to chapter 1 of 1 Samuel, Shmuel Aleph. It's the Haftarah that we read the first day of Rosh Hashanah, when Hannah was praying to God that she has no children and she'd like a child. And that ultimately plays out with God blessing her with a son, Samuel, whom she devotes to God by giving him over to Eli the Kohen to be reared in Eli the Kohen's custody. Okay, so we see in that text of 1 Samuel 1:13, when she prayed to God, Hannah was praying in her heart. Only her lips moved, but her voice could not be heard. From that we learn that when the Kohen Gadol is inquired, is asked something for the Urim and Tumim, it should be very soft voice, speak so quietly that no one else can hear. Okay. One does not ask about two matters simultaneously. If there are two things you need answered, you must ask them in two separate questions. Rather, one asks one question, and after he is answered, he asks a second question. And even if he asks two questions at once, what lawyers call a compound question, is it hot outside and is it Tuesday? That's a compound question. And you're not supposed to do that in the practice of law. Let's say at a deposition. So you ask a deponent, is it hot outside and is today Tuesday? Because the answer could be yes. And then at trial, what was the yes referring to? That it's hot outside or that today Tuesday? So for clarity, you're supposed to object on the other side and say, ask each question separately. And it's the same thinking here, that a question asked of God, so that there be no misunderstanding, every question of the Urim Tumim must be asked separately. He's answered only with regard to one question. If he asks two, he's given only one answer. He's answered only with regard to the first question. Is it hot outside and is it Tuesday? Yes, that means it's hot outside, not that it's Tuesday. It's answering only first. As it is stated, with regard to King David, what we just learned here, where he asked two questions simultaneously, that wasn't the way to ask, but he didn't know. It's like a new thing. So what did we learn? We learned that he went and he asked in verse 11, it's coming up, we didn't get to that. First he asked, should I go to battle in Keilah? Then later he asked, we learned it last week, I didn't review it now, when he had success against Philistines, Saul the king heard David just defeated Philistines, is now holed up in the city of Keilah behind a wall. You're refreshing your memory from last week. And David asked, Saul is coming now to kill me. Will the people of Keilah turn me over? I saved their lives, but people's loyalties, So he asked, Hayaskiruni ba'alei Keilah bi'ado hayerid Shaul kasher shema avdecha. Will the citizens of Keilah deliver me to his hands? Will Saul come down as your servant? So he erroneously asked two questions at once. What happened? So he was answered. Again, I'll just have to change the battery on my mouse a little bit later. Sorry that the cursor's jumping just a little bit. So as it stated with regard to David, before he was a king, he asked two questions. Will the men of Keilah deliver me into his hand, to Saul, and will Saul come down? And he was answered with regard to only one. He'll come down. And so we're going to go and take a look at that right now. Let's see if I want to even do any more of this right now. But maybe we'll take a look. So let's go back to that text. Come on, cursor. All right. So we had learned David and his men went to Keilah, fought against the Philistines, drove off their cattle, inflicted a severe defeat. David saved the inhabitants of Keilah, Jews in Israel. When Evyatar, the son of Abimelech, fled to David at Keilah, he brought an ephod with him. Because you're wondering, we learned last week, how did David have access to the Urim and Tumim to ask the question? Only the High Kohen would have that. How did he have that? Because when Saul killed out all the Kohanim, all the priests in the city of Nov, we learned there was only one survivor, Evyatar, the son of the high priest of the Kohen Gadol. And he fled, the one survivor, with his father's Urim and Tumim, because he, as the son, was the natural next in line to be Kohen Gadol. So that's how David was able to ask of the Urim and Tumim. Now, Saul was told that David had come to Keilah, and Saul thought, God's delivered him to my hands. For he shut himself in by entering the town with gates and bars. We learned this again last week, that as a walled city, they would lock it up every night. That's the whole point of a walled city, to keep out the bad guys. Except when the Nazis and other anti-Semites in history put Jews into ghettos, then the purpose of the walled city was to lock the Jews in, much as the Soviet Union locked us in and didn't let Jews out. Let my people go, we were trying to get out. But most places voluntarily build walls to keep the enemy out. So every night they lock up the city. So King Saul decided, now that David saved the people of Keilah, and I know he's based in a walled city, that means every night he's locked in there. So if we attack at night, he's got nowhere to flee. Saul summoned all the troops of war, go down to Keilah and besiege David and his men. David got word that that was Saul's plan. So he told Evyatar to bring the ephod. He said, I've got more questions. And David said, O Lord, God of Israel, your servant has heard that Saul intends to come to Keilah and destroy the town because of me. So I have two questions. I mean, I just saved the people of Keilah. Will they turn on me? Are they that fickle? Will the citizens of Keilah deliver me into his hands just to save themselves? And will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord God of Israel, tell your servant. And the Lord answered, right? You're supposed to ask only one question. Yered will go down. He will go down. David continued, will the citizens of Keilah deliver me and my men into Saul's hands? And the Lord answered, Yaskiru, they will. So again, even in English, two words, which is a correct translation, but in Hebrew, one word. God answers as tersely as the language can imagine. Typically one word, at most two, except with just no way to do it unless in fewer than one or two, in as few as one or two words. So the people will turn him over, and Saul will come. So David gets out of there fast before they lock up the city for the night. So David and his men, about 600, left Keilah, and they went wherever they could, just to get out of there. And when Saul was told that David had gotten away from Keilah, he gave up. Vayachtal Latzed, he gave up on his plan to pursue him. Okay. So to finish that Gemara, so we learned if the matter is urgent and requires asking two questions simultaneously, there being no time to follow the standard protocol, one may ask both questions simultaneously. And he is answered with regard to the two questions together, as it is stated, and David asked of God, in another place that we won't reach yet, chapter 30, shall I pursue after this troop? Will I overtake them? And God answered, pursue, for you will surely overtake them. So that's the basic idea. The Gemara notes the reliability of the Urim and Tumim. Even though a decree of a prophet can be retracted, if a prophet makes a prophecy, utters a prophecy, it can be retracted. There's a very famous Gemara where the prophet Isaiah prophesied to the very ill on a deathbed King Hezekiah, Chizkiyahu, that he would be dying shortly. And Chizkiah prayed to God, repented the particular sin that had caused a divine decree that he died prematurely, and he was given 15 extra years of life. So that's one example where a prophet of great stature, Isaiah, Yeshayahu, delivered a prophecy, and the prophecy was retracted. But when a decree is issued by the Urim and Tumim, it cannot be retracted. As it states, by the judgment of the Urim. That word judgment in the text, in 27:21, when it says, B'mishpat ha'urim, the judgment, it'll be not just a decision, not a perfect translation, but mishpat, the judgment. So once you get a ruling based on the judgment, then let's get there. Oh, you cursors give me a little trouble. Come on, just I'm so sorry. Okay, so once you have that, by the judgment, the use of the term judgment suggests that the decree is as final as a judicial decision, and there's no appeal because you're going to God. And then they go into greater detail, et cetera, and we'll skip some of that extra material that takes us much more afoot. Okay, so let's go back here, and let's go back to the text of our text for the day. David was staying in the strongholds of the wilderness of Yehudah. He stayed in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph, B'midbar Ziph. Saul searched for him constantly, but God did not deliver him into his hands. So this is taking place in the wilderness of Ziph. So let's refresh our memories. He was in Keilah, and then he works his way towards the wilderness of Ziph. So it's a bit of a distance, but it's not an insane distance. It's not like going from Keilah all the way up north towards the Lebanese border, or all the way south towards Sinai. Keilah to the wilderness of Ziph, near Choresh, near Ein Gedi. Okay, back to the text. So David was in the wilderness of Ziph, Midbar Ziph, and Saul by Avakshev Shaul Kol Hayamim. Saul just couldn't get him. He couldn't find him. Now David was once at Choresh. See, Choresh, in the wilderness of Ziph, when David learned that Shaul had come to seek his life. Shaul's son Yonatan came to David at Choresh. It's interesting. The father couldn't find him, but Yonatan knew how to find him. And so Yonatan went to Choresh. So again, here's the wilderness of Ziph, and here's the city of Choresh right at the wilderness of Ziph. So he's fled from Keilah because the people are going to turn him over, past Hebron. That's where Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Sarah, Rivka, and Leah, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah are buried. He goes to the wilderness of Ziph in Choresh, right near the city of Ziph, and Jonathan finds him. And Yonatan comes, and he said to him, do not be afraid. Remember this deep brotherly love between David and Jonathan. Do not be afraid. The hand of my father Shaul will never touch you. You are going to be king over Israel. And I, in brackets, gladly, shall be second to you. And even my father Saul knows this. And the two of them entered into a bris, into a covenant. The word bris does not mean circumcision. Circumcision is called bris because it's the act of formalizing that another Jewish boy has been brought into the covenant. So the actual act of the cutting is really not a brit. That's a milah. The word is milah, which also, without a yud, means the word. Mem lamed hey is word. Mem yud lamed hey is circumcision. Brit milah is circumcision into the covenant. The word Brit means covenant. The United, in street Hebrew, modern day Hebrew, the United States is called, they don't call it the United States. In Hebrew, it's called Artzot Habrit, the lands of the covenant. That's how they came up with a Hebrew term for United States. They could have called it, a more literal would have been Medinot Me'uchadot. That would be United States, Medinot Me'uchadot, but they called it Artzot Habrit. And the old Soviet Union was known as Brit Hamoatzot, the covenant of councils. Namely, the United Soviets, Soviets are councils. So anyway, the two of them entered into a Brit before God. He's like their witness. And David remained in Choresh, and Yonatan went back to where his father was. Some Ziphites went to Shaul in Gibeah and told him, David is hiding among us in the strongholds of Choresh, at the hill of Hachilah, south of Yeshimon. Because what's going on here? They are afraid, in light of what happened to the Kohanim, the Kohens of Nov, that was here, who failed to make Saul happy and he slaughtered the whole city. That's part of what leads people in Sif to be afraid. Saul ever comes here and finds out David was here and we did not tell him, God knows what he'll do to us. So they come and inform Saul, Shaul HaMelech, that David's been here near Choresh, right next door over. Okay, so the text continues. Saul finds out where to find him. So if your majesty has a desire to come down, come down. It'll be our pleasant task to deliver him into your majesty's hands. And Shaul replied, may you be blessed of the Lord. Bruchim atem Lashem. May you be blessed of God for the compassion you've shown me. Finally, I can get this dire enemy, and it's a tragedy because David is not his enemy at all. Go now and prepare further. Look around and learn what places he sets his foot on and who has seen him there. For I've been told he's a very cunning fellow. Look around and learn in which of all his hiding places he's been hiding. And return to me when you're certain. I will then go with you, and if he is in that region, I will search him out among all the clans of Yehudah, of Judea. They left at once for Ziph, ahead of Saul. David and his men were then in the wilderness of Maon. So where is that? So the wilderness of Maon, so he was in the wilderness of Ziph, and he's in Choresh, and they're in Ziph, and meantime, David has moved south. So while the Ziphites have gone to Saul reporting that David is in Choresh, David is beat a retreat southward to the wilderness of Maon. Okay. When Saul and his men came to search, David was told about it, and he went down to the rocky region and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. On hearing this, Saul pursued David in the wilderness of Maon. We're going to have a big showdown like Gettysburg. And they can't run. This is where he is. This is where I'm going to be, and we're going to have this out. Shaul was making his way along one side of a hill, and David and his men were on the other side of the hill. Kind of think a little bit like that David and Goliath battle, when the Philistines were on one hilltop and the Israelites were on the other hilltop, and there was a big valley between them. Well, that's what happens if you're ever in Israel. It is mostly not topographically flat. There is an area known as the coastal plain of Israel, the coast of the Mediterranean in the west, places like Ra'anana, Herzliya, Kfar Saba, but Jerusalem is very, very hilly. it has that flavor. I mean, difference of life, difference of night and day, but it's got the topographical flavor of San Francisco. Again, night and day. But you see on the streets of San Francisco, different. I mean, you have people on the streets of San Francisco also presenting themselves as prophets, issuing their prophecies. You know, the world will end by tonight. So there's no shortage of prophecy in San Francisco, but it ain't Jerusalem. But if you've ever been in Yerushalayim, it's very much like San Francisco. I remember, in fact, I don't know what my future will hold. We'll just have to see. None of us knows, and I'm included. I've always dreamt of being able to finally make Aliyah and at least live some of my life in Israel. I did once for 2 years, and I'd like to do it. Whether it's going to happen, I don't know. And when I went with Rebbe Tzanel and Zichron Livracha, blessed memory, in 2019, and we were in Eretz Israel, at that time already my lungs were shot. I was still 2-3 years from a lung transplant, but I already at that time was using a portable oxygen concentrator. And I was going, to use the topographical expression, I was going downhill. So anyway, my dream had been to live in Jerusalem, to live in Israel, and to live particularly in Jerusalem. And when we were in Jerusalem, and we were there for like 2 weeks, I looked at Ellen Zichron Livracha. I said, we're not going to be able to live in Jerusalem. I can't walk here. I couldn't walk uphill. I couldn't. It's not, you could. In fact, now I could too. But at that, I couldn't walk uphill. I couldn't walk a few steps. We were at the King David Hotel. And for Shabbat, we went to the King David Hotel because we wanted to be within walking distance of the Kotel Amaravi, the Western Wall, and the Great Synagogue of Jerusalem. And we went to the concierge when we checked in. And that was a real concierge, not like from the producers, Boyd's, nothing but filthy, dirty, disgusting Boyd's. But anyway, remember asking, and concierge was saying, you know, it's a very easy walk. You could go there Shabbat morning, just here, he showed me the map. It's a short walk. It'll take you 20 minutes. You'll be right there. I couldn't walk 5 minutes, even on flatland. And then he's Kotel, he said, it's a half an hour. You just go there. And we ended up needing, we had to end up praying at the synagogue in the hotel. And we had to take a cab towards the Kotel. And the cab can only get just so close. So you had to walk through the shuk. And I had to stop several times on like benches because I couldn't do it. So very hilly, very mountainous. So that's why you have all these stories of battles taking place and there's hills going on. So here we go. Saul was making his way along one side of the hill, David on the other. David was trying hard to elude Saul, and Shaul and his men were trying to encircle David and his men and capture them. When a messenger came and told Shaul, come quickly, for the Philistines have invaded the land. That's God's miracles. David actually was being cornered. It was very, very close to him being killed. Saul had been informed that he's in the wilderness of Maon. They found the general location, and they started to set up an encirclement. And by God's miracle, God sent the Philistines to make war. And no one really died in that war, but he made a war that forced Saul to abandon the front against David and to go and defend against the Philistines. As a result, Saul gave up his pursuit of David and went to encounter the Philistines. And that is why that place came to be known as Selah HaMachlekot, Rock of Separation. So David is still alive. Vayal David, chapter 24, Misham Vayelet, Vayeshev, Bimsadot, and Gedi. So now he's at the wilderness of En Gedi. And En Gedi, again, this is all the same area, wilderness of Ziph, Horesh, the wilderness of Maon, and En Gedi. En Gedi, the goats of En Gedi, it's a very famous biblical reference. And when the people were in the year 73, and they were at Masada, they relied on some of their assets and meat and everything to come from Ein Gedi. It's a long story, no time for it now. But Ein Gedi was a very important place. And when Saul returned from successfully pursuing the Philistines, now he came back to get David. David's no longer in the wilderness of Ma'on. Rather, Shaul was told, now he's in the wilderness, Midbar Ein Gedi. The word Gedi means goat or kid. Chad Gadya on Pesach. Gedi, Gadya, means goat. It's a place of goats, the goats of Ein Gedi. So Shaul took 3,000 men. This is how much he wants to kill David, who doesn't even want to be fighting him. He's married to Saul's daughter. He's loyal to Saul. It's a tragedy. But Saul knows that if David lives, he will be the next king, and Saul's son will not continue the dynasty. So Shaul took his 3,000, like his best men. Ish Bachur. Here, Bachur means chosen. Bocher is to choose. Takes 3,000 select men, and he goes after David in the direction of the rocks of the wild goats. Al Panei Tzurei HaYa'elim. A Ya'el, among other things, is a goat. It could also be, Ya'el is a name of many modern Israeli names for ladies. It has other references, and it mostly is because of an heroic woman in chapter 4 of the book of Judges, Shoftim, Perek Dalet, who was involved in the battle of with Barak the general. Another story, again, I can't go out of there now. Vayavo el Gidrodat son al Derech B'Sham Ara. And King Saul went, and this is the last thing we're going to be studying for today. King Saul went pursuing David through the sheep area into a cave. And Vayavo Shaul lahasech et raglav. And Shaul went in to relieve himself. You know, you don't really think about it, but people do have to go to the restroom. And it's like on television and the movies. Jackie Mason once made the point there's too much sex in the movies, too much sex on television. And he says, like, I go to script writers and say, why is there so much sex? And he says that they answer me because sex is part of life. You can't tell the story of life without telling sex. Sex is part of every person's life. And Jackie Mason says, soup, S-O-U-P, soup is also part of every person's life. In fact, he says, based on my own personal experience, I have a lot more soup each day than I have sex. Why don't they have soup in the movies? You never see people having soup, going to the bathroom. The amount of times he says he goes to the bathroom every day compared to sex, says you don't see people going to the bathroom. That's life. Normally the Talmud, the Tanakh, is not going to talk about that. It's not urgent to the story, and it's understood. People need to. But this is an important point they're making here, because you immediately ask yourself, why is it telling me that Saul is relieving himself? Like, that's not a thing that everybody relieves themselves a few times a day. And what's that doing here? And the Talmud tells us. And with that, that's the last thing for today that we have time for. Let's take a look. And it says that he went with regard to modesty in a bathroom. When David found Saul in the cave, so here's what basically happens. I have to read just a bit more so you can appreciate this text. So David's men said, so David and the cave had like two compartments, the front, and there was like a kind of like a wall, not that someone built a wall, but a rock formation. And there was the inner rear of the cave. And actually that's where David and his men were hiding from Saul. And he had no idea he's relieving himself. He's in the cave where David and his men are. David's mentor said to him, this is the day of which the Lord said to you, I will deliver your enemy into your hands. You can do with him as you please. David went and stealthily cut off the corner of Saul's garment. In other words, Saul had taken off his garment while urinating, and David actually, at risk of his safety, sneaked in the darkness of the cave and cut off the corner of the garment. And next week we'll go into that. And we'll go into that. And now back to this Gemara with which we're. So when David found Saul in the cave and spared him, tearing the corner of his coat, he said to him, "Behold, this day your eyes have seen. The Lord delivered you into my hand. I could have killed you, but I spared you." So the Gemara says, why does the verse say, and he said, it should say, and I said, and you spared, it should say, I spared. I want to get to the point here. Okay, here we go. Here we go. And what is this modesty? I made a reference to the Gemara saying modesty in the bathroom. As it is written, and Saul came to the sheepcotes by the way, where there was a cave, and Saul went in, literally says, to cover his feet. And this was what he was doing. And in those days, there were no toilets and public restrooms. He went to cover his feet. David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. As was sages taught, there was a fence within a fence and a cave within a cave. Rabbi Elazar says, this teaches that even there, all alone, he had no idea David was in the inner cave, and his own men did not accompany the king into the cave when the king relieved himself, because that would be dishonoring the king. And so out of respect to the king, they understood he's going in for relieving himself, so they'll stay out. So he was there all alone. No one would see him. And even there, with no one watching, he covered himself with a garment like a sukkah. Just as a sukkah top completely covers the garment, in the same way, Saul completely covered himself, teaching us that he was a very modest person. Modest in the sense also not only that he actually was humble, despite this terrible pursuit of David, but that he was religiously modest. We live in an extraordinarily modest time. The Talmud says in, I believe, Masechet Sanhedrin, in the folio around 103 or so, like the first 10 after 100, talks about when will Messiah come? When will we know Messiah is going to come? And they talk about different signs that the Messianic period is coming. And one sign of the Messianic period is when the world becomes dog-faced, D-O-G-faced. And then the Talmud asks, what does that mean to be dog-faced? And they say, like a dog, when a dog needs to urinate, looks for a tree, looks for a pole, and it urinates. No shame that people are watching. Does what it has to do. It's a dog. When people will act like dogs and have no shame and no spiritual modesty and spiritual self-respect, but just a pure, shameless brazenness, that's a sign that Messianic days are not far away. And in that respect, there's that unfortunate element. So we see it more and more. It's not yet the majority practice in the country, but many of us who grew up, and I don't like to think of myself as an old man. And I remember when I was in my teens and 20s, when someone would do what I'm about to do now, I would look at that person and say, now that's an old man. But the way it used to be, right? Donna Reed Show, Ozzie and Harriet, Bilko, Car 54, My Three Sons, the old shows, Lucy, they found humor without being brazen. And now dirty words are regularly used on TV, on commercial TV. It started with Jerry Springer and stuff and cable now, and the brazenness and the overt, it's terrible. It really is. And I'm not a prude at all. I don't want to present myself like I'm so holy. But there's times that I mean, if I can't show my congregation a stand-up comic for a 10-minute skit, Barry sent me to Dry Bar Comedy. I found some good stuff. So if I can't show, you can't show comedy. You can't show anything. You can't go to a comedy club. It's terrible. It's really terrible. And it also just makes it very easy to make jokes because you don't have to work hard to be witty and clever. You just throw in bathroom stuff and you'll get laughs and talk about male-female physical relations and everybody gets nervous and you get laughs. And it's a lot harder to be witty and clever. And so anyway, I did want to bring this Gemara. You don't get that feeling as you're hearing about King Saul pursuing David. He was a very religious, very humble, modest man. Unfortunately, he was driven by an evil spirit that took hold of him. And next week we'll get even, excuse me, next week we'll get deeper into chapter 24.